Okay, great. We'll get started with the February 20th ETAC meeting. My name is John Borowski. I will chair this evening. I'm the vice chair, I believe. We'll go around and do a round of introductions, and then Eliza is a new member to the committee. So Eliza, you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself. And then I would like staff to kind of give her just a quick little proffer, or I don't know if you guys have had a meeting with her. Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Okay, so she knows what we're getting into. So let's just do a round of introductions as to who you are, how long you've been on the committee, and what your area of interest or expertise might be. So I'm John Borowski. I am the vice chair. Been on this since it was before ETAC. I can't remember what it was called before. Initially got on as a member of the Planning Commission, and then now I am an at-large member. So Howard, you will be next.
Sure. I've been on ETAC since the beginning. I started when I was chair of the Sustainability Commission. And so my interest has been mainly environmental, ecological effects of land use planning, since that was my professional background. And I also am chairman of the board of Lane Regional Air Protection Agency. I serve as one of Eugene's city council appointees on that particular body.
Great. Mark, you're next.
You're on mute.
Got you now.
Should be okay now, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, I've been on the ETAC itself since it was started, and I've lost track of how many years ago that was, 5 or 6 or something. I'm an at-large member. My background is as a University of Oregon Earth Sciences professor, and with a long-standing interest in land use as a side interest. At the university, I work on natural resources, but in my non-university geologist life, I've been involved with gravel pit sightings and farmland protection and matters of that kind. I think my main area of contribution to this group has to do with the technical aspects of land use. That is, things like slope stability and flooding and things of that sort that have an earth science component.
Great, thank you. Dennis, you'll be next.
Hi, Dennis Reynolds. I'm here as a representative from the Sustainability Commission. About 3 years, missing the last couple of meetings of some conflicts around travel and other conflicts. But I've been doing some catch-up reading and kind of two pieces, looking at those obviously issues of density and their impact on transportation. And this week, I'm particularly attuned to issues of urban forestry, because that's what the commission heard last night, and where that overlap is, and what that means in terms of carbon offsets, and all those issues are spinning in my head tonight. So, and I've been part of this group for about 3 years plus, and just kind of heads up for folks. I'm starting to put up the word to other commissioners. My term on that commission ends in June. And so there will be another official designee from the Sustainability Commission.
Great, thank you. Tiffany.
Well, hi there, Counselor Kaczynski. Good to see you. Sorry, I'm sick. I am currently the chair of the ETAC. I have been here since its inception as the ETAC. I believe that was in 2018. And I serve in the role in capacity as a planning commissioner, but also, as you know, my day job is I do the policy work for the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. So I bring that sort of business perspective as well. And it's a good group. So welcome. We're really glad to have you.
Hey, Eliza.
Hi, I'm Eliza Kaczynski. I'm the Eugene City Councilor for Ward 1. and was in the city council representative to this group. I was started in office about a little over a month ago. This would be my first meeting for this committee. Before being elected to council, I served on the Eugene Budget Committee and on the Lane County Planning Commission, and have had a fairly deep interest in land use and housing for a number of years. And so I'm very excited to be able to join this group.
Great. And then staff, would you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Elena Domingo, Associate Planner for the Long Range Team that works on the Growth Monitoring Program.
And I'm Heather O'Donnell. I'm a senior planner also in long range planning, formerly called community planning and design is our formal name. And I was also part of the Wayback Group before EETAC. So that was called the TRG, Mr. Brofsky. And that stood for the Technical Resource Group. And so that was part of Envision Eugene, kind of a group of volunteer data verifiers that really helped us kind of unpack all the assumptions that go into UGB planning. And then also we're advocates for setting up the growth monitoring program. We didn't know what it would be called at that time, and setting up an EETAC that has representatives from the Planning Commission's Sustainability Commission and City Council. And a lot of the kind of fundamental pieces of the framework of the program. So we have them to thank, and some of the members on here to thank for that work. And I also I'm sure Counselor Ye is not watching because she must have another assignment now that she's not assigned to this group, but I will put it into the universe that we really appreciated her time on the EETAC. And I hope that you're able to chat with her if you haven't already about her time. And I definitely heard her make comments at City Council about things she learned or heard at EETAC. And so that's something that we really value and feel is important to have that connection to City Council. So we appreciate you being here. We're excited, and we hope that you are excited about details because that's the world that we live in.
Yes, Eliza loves details. I've worked with her on several committees and she digs into those things. So, all right, we will move on. Just so you know, there's a couple other members, Phil Farrington, who is in the kind of the development community, Sue Pritchard, who is on the TRG, and Rick Duncan, who is also on the TRG with us. Sue is was a commercial realtor, and Rick was a commercial appraiser and realtor, and a long-term planning commissioner. So they bring great insights as well. So we'll look forward to seeing them in the future.
As well as Lisa Arkin, who's
Oh
with
yeah,
Beyond
Lisa Arkin
Toxics.
from Beyond Toxics. Sorry. Yeah.
Think we're gonna jump, you said or probably going to minutes, but I don't think we're gonna have a quorum tonight to pass the minutes from July based on who was absent at that meeting and who's absent at this meeting. So I think we're just gonna punt that for now.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. Is there anybody in the public comment?
We do have a couple of folks who are joining us tonight. I don't think we're going to open it up for public comment, but I know one of them is with the Register Guard and another is a student who is sitting in watching for a class tonight.
All right. Well, welcome and thank you guys for joining our little geek squad here. With that, we will move on to item number 2, which is the growth monitoring annual report for the key housing data.
Dawn, I was hoping we could touch on the Zoom protocol.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We don't usually go over it because everybody's been using them for a while, but I think it's good it's fine to do a refresher. And I think anytime we have a new member.
I'm happy to do that if you'd like me to. Just that we usually ask folks to keep their cameras on. I totally understand that you're sick right now, Tiffany, but just to be a little bit more engaged. Raise your hand if you want to be put in the queue to talk, and we'll try and monitor that if we're sharing screen for each other, and have the chair monitor that as well. And then please just don't use the chat feature because we just don't have a great way to keep track of that or keep it in the public record. So I think that's about it.
Okay. And just so you know, a lot of the times these meetings are at the dinner time, so don't be afraid to be feeding yourself while you're digesting all this data. All right, you ready to move on now, Heather? Okay, it's Elena starts us off with growth monitoring annual report for key housing.
Yes, however,
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna punt it to Heather to start sort of about density.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But and before we get to that, I just saw Phil popped in. Phil, we did a round of introductions because we have a new member. Counselor Kaczynski is replacing Counselor Ye. So if you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great, and then we'll jump into the materials.
Hey, Eliza, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Do you want to talk about your interest in the ETAC?
Interested background, kind of.
Just some background interest.
Yeah, you know, I mean, long career in planning and development. So, yeah, that's sort of what brings me here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry to put you on the spot right when you jumped in. So normally when we bring the data for the annual report, we are kind of surgically going through and amending the annual report. And Elena will drop in, we'll talk about that more. Because the annual report is supposed to be more of a report card. We're not doing a ton of analysis or digging into things a lot. We're looking for like red flags, and we're creating a historical record over time. And then of course, if something changes, like the Middle Housing Code amendments, which changed some of our definitions for housing or our labels for housing, then you know, we might have things like that we have to bring forward to the ETAC that are new in the annual report. But essentially, we try to tackle things in pieces with the annual report. And housing, we usually start out with the permits, housing permits, because the state has been requiring us to report on housing production annually, so by calendar year, by February 1. It sounds like that requirement is going to be changing and is going to be a little bit longer out, but we'll address that later at another meeting. But we want to keep on the calendar schedule because we get a lot of inquiries about what type of housing did we see primarily last year? What was the density? All of those things. And so we try to bring the topics to the ETAC or we try to bring annual data to the ETAC by topic area. So housing permits would usually cover, you know, the number of new units we saw, the type of housing we saw, what mix of housing types, housing density, and then the buildable lands inventory, how quickly is our land being developed by housing? And all of those are in the context of, are we on pace or not with what we assumed? Land use efficiency measures is another one that we usually try to tackle. So how many new homes have we seen through building permits that were part of or received the benefit of one of our land use efficiency measure actions that we have previously adopted? And I'm going through this as at a pretty high level because we did meet with Counselor Kaczynski for about an hour almost last week, and we'll follow up again if you have more questions. But I think you have a pretty good overview. So density, which is one that everyone's always interested in, now that we're starting the Urban Growth Strategies project, or we have been starting it, the good news is that we've been taking some of this data and feeding it to our consultants, Echo Northwest, to help inform that 20-year urban growth strategies work. And that was part of the reason we started this. That was a big reason we started this, is to be able to give data to the consultants that we didn't have before and that they really need. So as that happens and we're putting these assumptions into practice, Echo is able to say, it'd be great if you had it this way. It turns out it would be great if this was a little bit more refined, or if you did the calculation a little bit differently. Most of the time, I think they also realize that we're a bit limited, because anytime you're automating data, you're going to have some concessions you're going to be making. But with density, the good news is that they feel like we just need to refine the way we're coming to the averages, kind of the calculation that we're using for coming to the average density that we're seeing by housing type and on the land types. So we have a plan, and we're in the process of working on that with our IT staff. But we don't have that to bring to you. And that impacts a number of things, not just density, but also some of our efficiency measures are dependent on or assumed that we would see a higher density if we did this efficiency measure, like increase the minimum density in R2. That was one of our efficiency measures. Well, we can't do that calculation right now because we're fixing the way that we're calculating density to be more accurate, really. So we're just kind of narrowing in. We'll go into more detail and give you some examples when we have the revised numbers and the revised method. We'll show you like the differences. But anyway, unfortunately, we won't have that. And I just wanted to kind of air that to this group.
Thanks, Heather. All right, well, we can get into what we do have. Okay. So I included a caveat at the beginning of this housing data that talks about the ONA need, which I think some of you know about, but basically our Oregon Housing Needs Assessment those rules are basically fundamentally changing how cities plan for housing moving forward, and takes a much more comprehensive approach in determining what a city's housing needs are. So right now, the forecasts that we have in our current report are essentially based on population growth, whereas we know moving forward, that's going to be based on current need, which is underproduction, as well as housing for people experiencing homelessness, and then future needs. So addressing population, as well as household composition shifts and the impact of second and vacation homes. So just something kind of what we wanted to flag for you all up front is we're using some language like met or on pace and things like that. And that's true for the forecasts that we made on how we used to plan, essentially. So we know that those are going to be changing moving forward, and just wanted to sort of center you all by acknowledging that up front. So our just as usual, I kind of am scrolling through and highlighting some of the key data here, but if anybody wants to jump in, has questions, is confused, as I'm kind of going through, just raise your hand, flag that for me. And yeah, feel free to stop me and jump in. So our first chart here is our dwellings on average per year. And through 2020 through 2022, we were up a little higher. We saw a dip in 2023, but in this past year in 2024, we saw that number of issued permits kind of rebound back up. The annual average was 962 dwellings per year compared to our forecast of 755 dwellings per year. Just gonna keep going. Go to our housing mix. So about 22% of new dwellings were single unit of the 11,000, sorry for the scrolling, 11,757 new units over the monitoring period. About 22% of those, so about 2,500 of those new dwellings were single unit detached dwellings. About 75% were multi-unit dwellings, almost 8,800, and then about 4% were middle housing, 443. And obviously, we're just continuing to see a lot of multi-unit development, that production is a lot, and that if that trend continued would obviously be much higher than the adopted forecast of 25% for multi-unit housing. Bill.
To be clear, if you could scroll back to the top where you started.
Yep.
2 pages up.
Up here?
3.
Or
yeah. So again, even though the multi-unit is above pace, overall, the number of new dwelling units you have it as on pace, but we are below the forecasted amount of need, right?
Oh, sorry, below the forecasted amount of what?
Of housing needed.
We are not. Well, so the forecast for the 20-year period between 2012 and 2032 was 15,105 dwelling units. And so from 2012 through 2024, we've met about almost 80% of that forecast. And so we still have 7 more years of that period to meet 20% of the need that we had forecast. So in the overall realm of dwellings, we are on pace to meet the forecast. But if you break it out by housing type, you're not meeting the forecasts in middle housing and single unit.
It seems though like I'm recalling that Heather had told us before about really kind of what a hole we were in terms of housing production for a number of years, and maybe it just predates the base year of 2012. So, is that correct? That it seems like we may hit our, another 7 years if all of the things being equal, we were to end up hitting this forecast. That doesn't mean that we have met our housing need, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
And so that was what Elena was talking about in the beginning, is that until we have a new adopted forecast that we're planning for, which will be somewhere around 30,000 units to plan for not just population growth, but that paragraph at the top, homelessness, decades of underproduction,
Mhm.
second homes, all that stuff. Until we have a new adopted need, we don't change these numbers of what the adopted forecast is because we haven't adopted yet, right? And so if you have ideas about how we should deal with that while we're in this interim period, the only thing is that this is going to happen at least every 8 years. We're always going to be working towards we'll have an adopted forecast that we're working towards, and then in 8 years we'll have to have adopted a new forecast and a new BLI and all of that. So there's always going to be this period of time where our growth monitoring reports are coming out based on an old forecast while we're working on a new forecast. And so, I think we don't want to stop doing the growth monitoring report, and we don't want to stop reporting on how we're doing compared to our last forecast, because it's our last adopted forecast, but it is tricky.
So I put myself
Okay.
in the queue. So
I mean,
do,
look,
go ahead.
if I could just kind of
Yeah, go ahead,
expand
Phil.
upon, the reason for this question is to sort of like, hopefully none of us, nor any reader of the annual report, including council, should not be mistaken into thinking that, well, 15,000 housing units and the number of dwelling units during this forecast period gets us to where we need to be. That is not the case. I mean, so I understand that there is this, sort of a ripple that is kind of held every time we do this update, and the data isn't quite so concurrent. But it just bears kind of collectively us reminding ourselves that we have a big, deep hole in needed housing, and let's not, fool ourselves into thinking that even though we've had this big production of multifamily housing, that we're getting close to meeting that need of housing. We're not. So unless I'm totally wrong, but I don't think I am.
No, you're right. And again, that's why we put that paragraph in the beginning. So if you have other recommendations, like we could take the on pace, below pace, we could take that out of number of units. I mean, there's,
Yeah. I mean, just maybe just like putting that first paragraph in bold type or something like
yeah.
that. Like, oh my gosh, it's some people might just jump ahead to the table and just go, good, we're doing fine.
Right.
That's
So,
helpful. Thanks.
so I put myself in the queue with a couple of questions, and first I'll caveat it. When we came up with that 15,000 number, that we were just looking at the data that we were allowed to use, which was the amount of increased population. So we weren't looking back and saying what was our need, our beginning hole, and we have to build out of that. We weren't allowed to do that under the state, under the rules that were written then. So my question is, the adopted needs and the rules for those, when can we start implementing those into our numbers? Have those rules been written, and are they part of they are written?
Yeah.
So,
Can we hold that question till when we get to the urban growth strategies timeline? Because it's related to revising our timeline.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Eliza and then Dennis.
I was gonna answer a question that I think John just answered for me, which was this number was based on a very prescriptive methodology for determining housing need that may or may not have been related to what we actually needed. Is that correct? Like it didn't account for underproduction and things like that historically.
Right. It was a portion of our need. It was just for housing to address the amount of population growth that you were expected for the next 20 years. Now that is a portion of going forward that is still a component. We still have to, use that, but it feeds into with like 4 other components.
And I would agree with Phil that having daylighting that a little bit more would be really helpful. Because, you look at this 15,000 number, and those of us who follow this know that that's not what our actual need is. And maybe, one way to do that is to be a little bit more explicit about what that methodology historically was. Because you mentioned that it's different, but like it's not in that paragraph sort of saying this is solely how many houses we would need to accommodate new folks moving to Eugene, and I guess being born here and starting in separate houses. Did the old one even include like new household formation, or was it purely just
It
population?
was taking the population growth projected and dividing it by the number of persons per household that we see on average in Eugene.
Okay, so not even really looking at household formation at all, just
Right.
okay.
And so, I mean, yeah, without getting into too much detail, because we're not going to be using it anymore going forward, we're going to be using the new, the simplified way to think about it is, the number of people that PSU projected for us to grow going forward. And that included U of O, that included some demographic changes. So yeah, without getting into too much detail. And I know people are in the queue, but I want to mention that just for context, again, we have a report. This is just like a section of the report. And so I think what I'm hearing is putting something up front in the beginning of the report, and then maybe again when we get to the housing section, that's like caution. This is based on kind of the old way of doing things. And we have some slides that that will show you all at maybe the next meeting where we can talk about the new format for the ONA housing need. And maybe some of that gets incorporated into the beginning of the report just to like really show the differences. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. A good graphic for that would be the mirror that says objects in mirror are closer than they appear. Dennis, you're next.
Oh, still muted, Dennis.
Just, one reiterating what I'm heard in terms of emphasizing that intro piece and maybe saying we recognize this is on pace to meet an identified target, not to meet housing need, and to be that explicit, and then maybe referencing back to it in the specific chart, on pace to meet goal. So we're knowing that that's on pace to meet need is not the same thing as on pace to meet the goal.
I like that differentiation.
Yeah, and again, just being very clear up front.
Howard.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a long time since I've looked at this, and so I'm trying to remember. On the multi-unit number, does that include housing that's built primarily for students or other
It does.
exclusionary? It does?
It does include
Yeah,
includes
so
housing that we've
that's a little bit concerning to me because my impression is that a lot of that student housing isn't necessarily easily made available to the general populace. So that number, in my mind, it might be a little skewed.
We do include later here, let me find it, how the percentage. So about 32% of the dwellings of those multiple unit dwellings are identified as potentially student-oriented housing. So there's not like a hard science to identifying them, but we look at the areas around the university and then look at kind of like the name of the developer. Sometimes it's Duck
Yeah.
housing. And so we've identified those. And so it's about 32% right now. But we just continue to emphasize the fact that the students are part of our community. We do have to plan for them as well. They need housing. So I do totally understand your concern, and it's sort of they are part of
Yeah.
what we're
I get
planning
that,
for.
but I think this table, summary table, I think, and maybe, you know, Phil definitely was alluding to this, paints a lot rosier picture than what it is. And people that are looking for housing, especially multi-unit housing,
Yeah.
probably is not going to be looking, you know, people that are working and all that kind of stuff, not attending university, is not going to be looking at that housing as a potential place to live.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it seems to me that the deficit is a lot larger than what is being portrayed in that table, and I have concerns about presenting it that way.
Okay.
And this,
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts in terms of one, I agree, but I also noticed elsewhere in the report, we're not counting the housing the university itself is developing in this report. So the more the campus does itself, the less pressure there is. And I would also add that the reality is every student who moves into a student apartment is one less student competing with housing in the larger market. So maybe there's a way to separate it out, but developing student housing does open up spaces in the larger markets simply because students aren't in that larger, community competitive market. And I don't know how best to articulate that, but maybe, being clear about the student-oriented housing, if that could be identified and easier to spot.
Okay. Thank you. Don't see any hands at the moment.
Elena, if I
Yep.
could add on to that, just as a reminder for this group that, because you brought this up, Dennis, which I think is a great point, is that housing that is public housing for students, so dorms, grad student housing, that's not in the, it's not a market developer developing it. That is under the group quarters housing, housing type. And so just as a reminder what that is dorms, nursing homes, jails, assisted care facilities that share a facility, and the individual rooms are not their own units, things like that. Those are considered group quarters, and we do not include those in this housing need. We're just talking about individual units here, and that's why we have that kind of in quotes student-oriented housing, because we're not looking at every building permit to make a determination about whether or not it only allows students. If it's like a commercial builder and they're orienting it towards students, as Elena said, we have some rough estimates, like if it's in the name, they market to like the collegiate, like things like that. They market it to students, it's near the university, or within close proximity. Those things we will flag as potentially student-oriented housing. But I just want to be clear that there's a distinction there. And like Elena said, we do not have the ability to say that the potentially student-oriented housing is for sure only students. Like, we don't have the capacity to track that down. And I don't think I'm not sure that they can require that one way or the other, right? Because students are protected, so they're a protected class. So anyway, I just put a caveat there because I understand we always run into this where folks want to separate out the potentially student-oriented housing, and it's not that clear cut. I mean, there's students that live in single unit housing too, right? So detached single units. There's students that live in ADUs. There's students that live in manufactured homes. So, we just have to, just as a reminder, because I feel like we revisit this a lot and it's just a tricky one.
Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I have a question and maybe a comment. I'll comment first. I think it's going to be a little tricky for you guys to track some of this stuff because as the university is continuing to develop housing and their strategy and intent, and they've been very clear about this, is to include more housing for upperclassmen and to convert, for example, Barnhart into more of an apartment style development, although you might have access to a meal plan. So that's a little bit of a tricky kind of tweener that the university is developing. Plus, they have, they're planning on developing townhomes along the large street that, again, are a different typology than students have traditionally had access to live in. But, that is going to be university owned housing targeted to students. I don't think you can live there if you're not a student. And there are properties like the one that we developed, which is close to campus and intended to cater to a broad variety of the market and the community. But given our proximity, there may be people who aren't students but want to live near campus or work on campus. And we do have a lot of students, but we don't separately lease the bedrooms, so we don't fall into that category. Question for you though is when you count the number of units and you do include, say, the Standard, the newest one that's right across the street from Whole Foods, do you count the number of units or the number of bedrooms? Because obviously there's maybe 500 units and about 750 bedrooms or something like that, or 1,200 bedrooms.
We're counting the number
Big
of
difference.
units.
You're counting the units.
Mm-hmm.
So in some sense, you're belying, if you're including those. I mean, the actual number of people is greater still than what you're counting. So it's a bit of an undercounting, even though we are, here I'm saying the same. You could go in the other direction of saying, like, are we overcounting the multifamily? Actually, in some sense, maybe we're undercounting because these student units have 5 bedrooms in one unit. So
Yeah. Okay. So I have a question, and if you go to the chart on page 2, that dwellings average per year. And this is total dwellings. It's not single family or single unit.
Correct.
Because the single unit one is the one that we're underproducing as far as what we had predicted. It's probably the one that is the most askew. Have we ever run a bar graph over this one that goes to interest rates to show a cause and effect of maybe the reason we're having a dip in some of these years is because there's a spike in interest rates and it just doesn't become economically viable? Just a question. I mean, I see that rate and I'm just wondering. And
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that is, we wouldn't, I don't know if we would do that annually, but certainly that's something we could look at doing like every other year. Or we could do it, well, actually, I guess once we had the interest rate for each year, then it would just be adding it. But yeah, we haven't done that, but that could be helpful for
predicting.
like the urban growth strategies work.
Yeah, I mean,
we could recommend that. Yeah.
you could say, we saw higher production in a year where it was 2% or 3 or 4%, and we saw a real dip when it went to 7 or 9, because as we all know, cost of money is definitely a part of the equation. And I just throw that out there because I see that graph and I've seen the interest rate graphs that are sometimes very similar. So, Eliza.
Yeah, sort of a question that's probably other people already know the answer to this, but how are accessory dwelling units and single room occupancy, if we've had any single room occupancies built, structured in this report? Like where do they fall?
ADUs are counted as dwelling units. So they're counting an ADU would be the same as a single unit dwelling and the same as one multi-unit dwelling.
Does it get
Uh,
put in the middle housing
It does
slice?
not. It does
It's
not get put in the middle housing space. It's in the single unit detached
okay.
dwelling unit space.
Lena, can you scroll to where that is on the report? Yeah. Thanks.
Here.
Okay. I
You've
must have
actually
missed that. That's a long
houses,
list.
dwellings.
Okay. And then single room
And
occupancy
SROs are
under multiple unit. And
under
so when you do
quarters. I can't remember how.
I see it now. It's also under multiple
Oh.
unit. And that gets to, I think, where the question I had that follows up on Phil's comments was for the SROs, are you counting each sort of single room as a unit for that?
No. So the way that our land use code works is that there is an equation for the number of units. It's like 4 or 6, I can't remember exactly. Bedrooms equals 1 dwelling unit. So that's how we count it, and that's how it's used for density calculations. What I am noticing, though, this is something we need to update in here, is that last year the state required single room occupancies to be allowed in every zone that you have that allows single unit dwellings. And so we actually have a split now where single room occupancy that is 6 or less bedrooms, we categorize as single unit detached. And if it's 6 or more, but less than 6 bedrooms is single unit detached. And if it's more than 6 bedrooms, is classified as multi-unit. That was the advice we got from the state, and we need to update our text to say that. But that's how it's being categorized. Now it's split out now.
Okay. Yeah, because I do think, because I feel like a lot of even if they're just permitted as straight multi-unit housing, a lot of the student housing developments function a little bit like single room occupancy. And so I do think that there is this element of it's really, space for 6 people, space for 4 people, but we're counting it as 1 unit. And so that's, I think, something to think about as we think about how we kind of highlight some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are being consistent with the land use code and how it defines the use. So if it comes in, there's definitions in the land use code about what a single room occupancy is, which now it has to meet the state requirements, what multi-unit is, what middle housing is. So I don't want to get off from that. And I think we haven't really gotten into this, but when we move into this new paradigm of housing planning with the ONA rules, we're going to have to relook at a lot of stuff. So I am hesitant to make a lot of changes right now to how we're doing reporting, because not only are we gonna be replacing all of our adopted forecasts, they're gonna look different. Like we're gonna have a housing forecast that is broken out by income brackets, like that housing has to be affordable to different income brackets. that's not really something that we're tracking right now. I don't know how we're going to do that. You know, like there's some pretty big changes. So we should keep that in mind as we go forward. Like, are there different ways that we want to group housing? And that it makes sense to do it. I will also caution a little bit that anytime we change something, it takes like a whole village of people to change it in our database system and test it and change it in reporting and all that. So we want to be strategic. I'm hearing what you all are saying about potential student housing and SROs. I would like to put a bookmark on that because I don't think that we're gonna, we don't have capacity to deal with that at this point.
Right. And some of this may be captured moving forward in our density calculations, because if you think about it, a 4-bedroom house with 2 people in it is similar to a 4-bedroom apartment that is utilizing 2 or more. So figuring out what our density number is per unit could maybe capture that discrepancy going forward in the future, not now, but you know, as we go forward.
Per unit or per type? I just want to make sure.
Or I'm not sure. I'm not sure where,
Oh, okay.
but that might be an area where we could capture this discrepancy. Is, you know, when we did the thing before, we said our average density per unit was 2.1 persons per single family detached, and it was this much for multifamily. We might be able to figure out that density, that capture this there. But I'm not saying do that now. I'm just saying that might be an option to capture this. So at this point, I think, are you guys okay to move on to the next?
Yeah. To efficiency
Group?
measures.
If there's no other questions.
Okay. Let's see.
Okay.
Oops, sorry.
So where are we going
Scrolling.
to next?
We're going to efficiency measures. So we're sticking with housing development.
Yay, my favorite.
Hopefully you all sort of, it's hard to tell in a PDF sometimes, but saw that there were some comments in the document here, sort of recognizing I did some strike through on the anything that referenced the R2 zone density change, because since we don't have density right now, we couldn't, and we're manually calculating those numbers, we couldn't do that as part of this. So just flagging that those are shown in strike throughs and that we will update those once we have density numbers. Let's see. So this first, I'm gonna jump to the chart. This first chart is just sort of the baseline dwellings from efficiency measures. It doesn't include some of the efficiency measures that we are still manually calculating. But even though it doesn't include those additional dwellings, it's still, we have the average dwellings that used efficiency measures is higher than our forecast, which again, we know our conversation, then that doesn't necessarily mean that it's meeting the need, but it is higher than the forecast that we had determined. Let's see. And then there's a couple of charts about efficiency measures by plan designation. And I also had a comment in here that flagged the fact that we were just reporting these showing by high level plan designation, whether it was residential or not residential. And as we've continued to sort of see, especially in the next chart, development occur sort of in a variety of plan designations. We decide, instead of just keeping this blue and orange to show residential and non-residential, we decided to show all of the different plan designations. So, so you could see it broken out better in the charts. let's see. I want to go next. So
I've got a go back to that
yeah,
chart for a second. I've got a
yeah.
quick question. So to me, the importance of this slide or this thing is figuring out which efficiency measures did the most bang for the buck. And you go through and you can figure out which ones work and which ones don't, and those will hopefully be integrated into our next plan. I'm wondering if there is thought of because what we've seen a huge number of new units built, mostly multifamily, but on commercially zoned land. And commercially loans not vacant, redeveloped commercially zoned land. So are we
Designated land?
designated commercially owned land, but that wasn't one of our efficiencies, rezoning from one zone to commercial. We did do some rezoning to higher densities, but we never went to the level of rezoning to commercial. I'm just wanting to flag that so that we think about that as an efficiency measure going forward, because we've seen it work. I mean, we see where the development is happening, where it's easiest for somebody to put a multifamily building is on a piece of commercial property, even if they have to tear down what is there now and start over. It seems like that's the easiest land to develop. So just think of that as an efficiency measure going forward. Whereas before we designated R1 to R2 and we saw no effect of that or very little effect of that for a number of reasons. So I just wanted to flag that for going forward. Phil.
I believe there was state legislation that also kind of dictated for income restricted housing that more or less just flexed the ability to put income restricted housing in commercial lands, allowing conversions from commercial use to a residential use without having to go through zone changes. There's a variety of 3 different kind of bills that were enacted within the past year, and I presume that either the Eugene Code was already consistent with that, or there were changes to the code to accommodate those state bills that were kind of like what John's talking about, efficiency measures. Is that correct?
Well, we already allowed housing in commercial. So, and certainly there are, probably other jurisdictions that maybe didn't allow it outright, particularly affordable housing, but we allow it outright. And actually controlled income and rent, we don't have a maximum density in commercial, but in other zones where there's a maximum density, we allow a higher, up to 150% of the max density for controlled income and rent. So we really, I think would be in alignment if there was a bill that was like, you have to allow commercial, you have to allow affordable housing. The question about whether or not our zoning code is consistent with allowing housing in a commercial building, my understanding is that, again, our zoning code already allows housing in commercial. And so you wouldn't need to do a rezone to do housing. It's more of a building code issue as far as how the building was constructed. It wasn't constructed for a residential use. So that has been my understanding about why that type of conversion of like office to residential isn't getting used as much as people would love it to be used.
But for example, if we were to change, like when we, for the industrial and jobs land, we redesignated some things to E2, right?
Right.
Well, if we redesignated E2 lands to
To
commercial,
commercial. Yep.
that may make it available to build either
Totally.
commercial or housing on E2.
Yes.
That's what
And
I'm saying as using it as an efficiency
yeah.
measure.
Yeah, and we in urban growth strategies, not in growth monitoring, but in urban growth strategies, we will be looking at if there are areas to rezone and redesignate, whatever that looks like. But right now, we can't rezone or we can't redesignate any land really because the last time we did our 20-year planning for Envision Eugene and we adopted the urban growth boundary, our our demand for 20 years basically matches our urban growth boundary land supply now. When we did the demand, it was like, oh, we don't have enough land for low density residential demand. So we redesignated land in the Crow Road area for low density. And then that bumped MDR, and so we increased the minimum density in MDR to account for that designation change. And we didn't have enough land for industrial. And so we expanded the urban growth boundary for the amount we needed to meet that 20-year need. So everything basically balanced out. And so we've been at this standstill where we can't really, there's hardly any fudge room for redesignating. But when we rerun our buildable lands inventory for this new 20-year analysis, that's the opportunity again to go, okay, clean slate. What's our need and where do we want it to go, right? And so, but we can't do that with this first round because we need the new BLI and we need the new rules and everything to be able to really do that stuff. But all of that is to say, yes, that's on the table.
Right. And what I'm saying is use the efficiency measure data that we have and say this one worked, this one didn't in the plan going forward. I'm not saying to do it now. I'm saying use the tools that you guys have developed over the years.
Yep. And the growth monitoring data is informing the fact that E1 and E2 aren't working as well as we hoped that they would. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, sorry about that, Elena.
Nope, you're good. I wanted to, where did it go? Wanted to flag the ADUs. So since July 1st, 2018, 150 ADUs have been permitted. And that meets 113% of the needed increase that was forecast for the monitoring period, even though that incentive didn't start until 2018. And so that jumped up again from 89% last year to 113% this year. Bill.
And I'm sorry if I've asked this before and you've told me the answer, but I can't remember. Is this net ADUs that are actually used for housing and exclusive of any ADUs that may have been built and used or occupied as short-term rentals, or is that not even tracked?
It is not tracked in our data, the short-term rental information. That information, as I noted with our owner need, is part of something that the state is looking at when they're determining our housing need moving forward. The city doesn't really have good data at all about how many units we have in the city that are rental units or which ones they are. So no, this is just overall ADUs total.
So really just based upon, issuance of permits for ADUs.
Correct.
And the city does do separately. I mean, from that, there is something that the city charges, and the city does have some monitoring process to know how many Airbnbs there are in the community, correct?
I believe that it is sort of a voluntary registration program. It's not So it's not comprehensive.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and right, and so I don't think everyone signs up and says that this address is a short-term rental. Because we have run a query to cross-reference new building permit data against short-term rental data. It is difficult to do a perfect match, but just to try to get some estimates, but because it's voluntary, it's not very good data at this point.
The other thing I was going to flag is our downtown development. And so again, this is sort of a situation where we have actually met the forecast need for units that are part of the programmatic approach downtown, which is units that are in the downtown plan area, units that received MUPD, and units that received urban renewal money. And so, but again, I think we really want to emphasize the message that like housing downtown is still very, very much a priority for the city. It's not like, oh, we've met this and now we're good to go. So I didn't really emphasize that or include a paragraph in this write-up. And I do think that we have language I think we included last year that I definitely will be including in this section for the report. Let's see. SDC exemptions. We are manually calculating, so I have a paragraph about it here. But 527 new affordable dwellings received exemptions for about $2.3 million. And then about $300,000 was used towards 18 other affordable housing dwellings. Let's see. Then we have our middle housing numbers sort of broken up into this chart, which show sort of 2022 before the code amendments were passed, after the code amendments were passed, though we know that those include permits that had already started before the code amendments were passed. And then we also have 2023 and 2024. So you can see we went from about 47 in 2022, which included a number of row houses in 2022, up to 101 and 104 in 2023 and 2024, which is exciting.
Do you know if, I mean, I know just anecdotally from some people who've are in the process that have had to hold back because of the appeal process that's out there. They haven't submitted because they don't know which language of the middle housing code they need to deal with. Do we know how many are out there?
Anecdotally, I have no idea. I know that is occurring in some instances, but I couldn't ballpark a number for you.
Okay. And has the appeal been resolved?
It has not.
Okay, thank you.
I do think though that's a great point that we could put it. We should probably put a footnote to recognize that that's been kind of going back and forth, not just for land divisions, but also for building permits. We still were implementing the model code when our code was under appeal, so I'm not sure that there was too much difference, but it's good to footnote it. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll see those start to tick up more once the process is clear and transparent.
Yeah, just I noted that in the narrative on that page, it talked about 29 tentative middle housing applications were submitted and only 15 were approved. any sense of why only kind of half of them met this current standard? Because there was
So
certainly an effort to do more.
thank you for flagging that, because that is obviously not clear at all in that sentence. So for the land use applications for rental housing land divisions, you have to do a tentative application first, and then you have to do a final application. And so those 29 tentatives are totally separate from the 15 final that were approved. So those 15 final were actually probably submitted last year as tentative and are now being approved as final. So we definitely need to, I think, add language there that clarifies that.
Right, yeah, because I looked at it and went, how come less than half of them are getting, or just over half of them are getting approved? So,
Which,
okay,
yeah,
that clarifies that for me.
yes, thank you. Okay. And then lastly is our buildable lands impact section. And I mean, I would say no huge changes from last year. 39% of dwellings occurred on developed land and 54% on vacant and partially vacant. But the forecast for that originally would be more like 23% and 77%. So, so just seeing more housing development on developed land than had been originally forecast. Housing is being developed faster on commercial and high density residential lands. And then last in this, and then you can see that total acres, actually, I think that's next one, sorry, are sort of overwhelmingly on residential designations. But it is interesting to note, I don't know where the note is exactly, but 682 residential acres were developed with around 7,900 dwellings, whereas 41 commercial acres were developed with about 3,300 dwellings. So that commercial development is just much more dense than on the residential designations.
Just a quick question. Is there any way to designate a building that may be both? That may be, the classic commercial ground floor with residential above?
You mean have a designation that would require someone to
Right.
develop
I mean,
that
is it
way?
is it easy to identify a commercial property that now has, say, 84 residential units in it, but also has a ground floor that's still commercial? Is there any way to identify commercially zoned land that is commercial and residential?
I mean, we do have that information in the sense like the Gordon Lofts and Fish Street Market.
Right, that kind of
That
stuff.
whole development we're tracking as one development site, which includes those new dwelling units as well as hotel, as well as commercial and a bunch of different uses. And so, I mean, we have that information. It would take some work to kind of like suss out those particular developments, but
Right, and right now you're just identifying the housing development numbers within those multi-use kind of entities. Okay.
correct, yeah.
So for the purposes of housing inventory, you're not paying attention to what else is happening in that building because you're just
Correct.
inventorying housing for this purpose.
Yes.
Okay, that
Yeah,
makes sense.
so then for that employment development's also being captured, but in our employment development charts. Bill,
And you're not also, I mean, there are some of like the big new student housing towers that are on commercial land, which is represented in this table. So they're very efficient, they're very dense, they're taking place where former commercial uses were. many of those, not all, but many have, beyond just the commercial leasing office on the ground floor, do have some kind of commercial space that I think is generally not been super successful. Some do and some don't. And maybe it's sort of the election of the developer, or maybe there is a requirement for some of these properties to have a true mixed use or some kind of percentage of the ground floor in a commercial use. And just a note too, that, you know, I think as we go through these, and John, you were talking about how interest rates and kind of how, you know, that may overlay on top of some of this trend information. Typically that has maybe a lag. So I mean, interest rates probably manifest themselves in a decline once they spike a year or two later, because the timing of getting financing and then delivering a project. But the thing to note here that I think is immutable is that on all this commercial land that's being developed, it's flat. And part of the reason why we aren't seeing more residential development where we have residential designations, we have so much that is sloped. And it's just more expensive and more difficult to serve. And it's just not as easy to build. Easy to build on a flat, small commercial piece where you can go up and it's close to campus. So,
Yeah. And I can give you an anecdote about putting commercial down below on some of those. I was part of an appeal on the one that's on the right on the corner of Hilliard and Broadway. And back when parking requirements were in play, back before parking requirements went away, if they had put commercial on the first floor, they could have cut their parking requirements in half, because they would have said that that's for my commercial thing. And they said that their leasing office was going to be their commercial thing, and it got appealed, and they said, no, that's not it. So, but that is moot now because of the way parking is allowed or is not required.
All right, I think that wraps up housing development, unless there's any lingering questions.
No.
Okay.
That was a lot. So I just want to read the room a little bit. So we typically go till 7:30. The next thing we were going to talk about is population and jobs, which I could do relatively quickly, although we do have a new population forecast and a new jobs forecast. We don't always have those. But I'm wondering if you all would prefer that we talk about the urban growth strategies timeline and the impacts to your schedule, and ETAC recruitment, or do you, yeah. Feel like there's been a lot of questions about what's coming, and just wondered if you wanted to jump to that, or if we're okay with going to population and employment, like maybe a thumbs up population and employment, so thumbs sideways.
I'll go with what the group is going with. I don't. So Heather, are you trying to say we won't have enough time to cover all of it?
I'm not sure, so I just want to do what.
How about this, Heather? Let's go to the timeline first, and we'll see how much time is left at the end.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, so yeah, we'll just switch the order a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
That sounds good. Share my screen. Okay, are you all seeing?
Yes.
Great. Are you still seeing the timeline?
Yeah, we just can't see the whole thing. The bottom two lines.
Bottom's cut off.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, how's that?
There you go.
Great. And let me flip this over, get my notes. Okay. So, sorry if this is a little bit if some of this is a repeat from what we talked about, but as you may recall, we were anticipating doing a pretty big push on the land studies. So the employment land studies right here, the housing in purple, the housing land studies, other urban land needs like schools, utilities, and everything. We were originally planning on that work and the buildable lands inventory happening in here in 2025 to the beginning of 2026, with the idea that we were going to adopt the comp plan phase 2, the comprehensive plan map, the land use map, housing jobs and actions part 1, and then the BLI and land studies all by the end of 2026. And so, as a reminder, the reason we were doing that is because we did recognize that the new ONA framework gives us a new housing need. It's much bigger, as we've been talking about. It's more comprehensive, so that we're not just planning for growth, but we're planning for underproduction and second homes and demographic changes. We didn't talk about that, but homelessness. So a bunch of things that we haven't really been allowed to plan for before in the context of an urban growth boundary planning. So the original schedule to get everything adopted by 2026, or all of those pieces, was using that we were trying to kind of have our cake and eat it too, using the new need, but using the housing planning state rules as they were at that time. So what I'm going to call them the old rules. And the reason we were doing that is because we were trying to do this work as fast as we could, because we realize, we know we're in a housing crisis. We've got this new paradigm that's coming. So we want to be in alignment with that and plan for a more comprehensive need. But we also know the old laws and rules. We did it before under those rules, and so we were trying to do things fast, but also do it under the new need. Well, what happened is that, as you also know, the new rules have been coming out in groups. So the first set of rules were giving us our new housing need, and we'll get a new need every year. Everybody in Oregon will. That way, whenever you're doing your housing needs analysis, you can always have the freshest projection for you. So that set of rules came out. Then a new set of rules came out, which we were watching very closely in January of this year. So that went into effect. And after looking at those rules and knowing that another set of rules is coming in January 2026, it became pretty difficult for us to thread the needle of using one set of new rules under the old paradigm, because the new projection for housing need and everything is so different, with, like I was talking about, all of those different components, and then also it's by income category and a bunch of other things. And so all of those kind of characteristics about your housing need projection was difficult to fit into the old rules. So we wanted to still continue to make progress on this work. And as you may recall, we were originally starting with housing, jobs, and actions, so land use efficiency measures and other housing production strategies, identifying those up front, because those are really what can have an impact on housing. A land study is going to have a long-term impact on providing land for housing, but really, like, things we can amend in the code right now, process changes we can make. Rezoning also, redesignation would have an impact, but we can't do that right now because we need a new buildable lands inventory. But you know, those kinds of actions are kind of more where the rubber meets the road. And we have been making good progress on those efforts, and so we don't want to stop that, right? And so what we're doing is that we're planning to use all of the new rules. So the new ONA projection, the rules that came out in January, and the new set of rules which will impact how we do a buildable lands inventory. Those will be coming out in January 2026. So we're going to use all of those. And what that does to our timeline is this first part up here, the comprehensive plan, phase 2, the land use designation map that you all looked at, the parcel specific, and then phase 1 of our land use efficiency measures and other housing production type strategies, removing barriers. Those are all still going forward to get adopted by the end of 2026. So we're still making progress there. What we are starting to work on is looking at the new rules, which have been more focused on the housing production strategy that we'll have to do. So that's like an action plan for removing barriers to housing. So we've been working on looking at those new rules and what they're going to mean and starting to implement that work. And we'll give you more. We'll go over this stuff in more detail. I'm just kind of letting you know what's happening with the timeline and how it relates to the ETAC. But we're going to want to bring the ETAC, or before I get to that, then the other impact on the timeline is that the buildable lands inventory will get run in early 2026, and we will do the land inventories, so the housing capacity analysis, the employment opportunities analysis, and then putting our land demand and our housing and our 20-year demand and our 20-year land supply and our efficiency measures together all in 2026. And the goal will be to adopt those just a year later by the end of 2027. We've broken the efficiency measures into 2 parts because we can do efficiency, like I said, we can do efficiency measure. You can always do efficiency measures, right? You can always do, amend the code and provide financial incentives and things like that, right? Technically, you can always do those. But once we have a new buildable lands inventory and we are using the new ONA numbers, and we have the new rules, when we put those 2 things together, we're going to know exactly where we have a deficit. Is it in land for low density residential? Is it land for medium density residential, high density, commercial, all of those things? And so we do anticipate that once we put kind of all of this together, including any actions we take in 2026, we may end up needing to do another package of efficiency measures to address those specific gaps in meeting our 20-year need. And that would be part of our 2027 adoption package, along with the residential land supply study with the housing capacity analysis, the employment land supply study with the economic opportunity analysis, and the new BLI. So that will all happen in 2027. And then, of course, that informs how much expansion we need and what type of land we need to expand the urban growth boundary for. Because the housing need is so big, and we've said this before, I think the last time maybe we came to the ETAC, we do anticipate that we're going to need to expand for housing. How much, what that looks like, where, We'll be looking at urban reserves, because we, did that work and we have those areas identified. Do we need to expand for some other need, like, parks or schools or whatever? So that's all happening here. And just before I get to you, Tiffany, what that means for the ETAC, because we had you really stacked up this year, is I think in kind of late spring, early summer, we'll be bringing you efficiency measure capacity estimates, kind of rough estimates about how much additional capacity we think we can get with the efficiency measures that we'll be doing outreach on. And then in the fall, we'll be coming to you to probably late fall, once the rules that are going to be adopted in 2026, in January of 2026, once those are more finalized, we'll be coming to you to talk about what those new rules look like and how we might want to adjust our buildable lands inventory method. Who knows what else, but there might be, there's probably going to be a number of things that we're going to be doing differently than we did last time in order to meet the new rules. And so, and then of course, growth monitoring stuff in there. But that's what I think is going to happen. Or what I think is going to be in front of you. So it'll be housing efficiency measures, jobs efficiency measures. We'll give you more background on the new ONA housing need, and then what that kind of looks like as we go for how we do planning, urban growth boundary planning.
Okay, Tiffany.
Hey, thanks, John. I think this is kind of a technical question, but I'm curious about, as we're thinking about the efficiency measures, what are we using to inform what efficiency measures for example, if we're seeing certain types of housing lagging behind and other types of housing are overperforming. And I'm just curious, like, what is the process to understand how to assess what's happening in the market or what's happening there, and then how do we know, like, what informs what tools we might want to use to address it? Or do we just throw out a whole bunch of ideas and see what sticks? I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, that's a big question. I'm not sure that I have a concise answer for you on that. We definitely are using growth monitoring data to help inform some of that. We have the redevelopment analysis that came to this group to inform, redevelopment in kind of center areas. We know that, again, growth monitoring data, when we reran the buildable lands inventory snapshot, we saw that 40% of our residential land in 2021 was not served with utilities. So that impacts housing production. And I think it was something like, to John's point earlier, about how much of our remaining land supply at this point is sloped, and that takes, it costs more to serve and develop. So, and then we have adjustment reviews. So, developers go through adjustment reviews, and Elena has been looking at those and saying, okay, what's the most adjusted development standards? And we're doing some work around that. So we're kind of in the research and gathering phase right now. And then we'll be going out for more, like, interviews and working groups and things like that. But we do have a lot of information already, because we've been hearing about these things and listening over the past several years. So
Okay. Thank you.
Bill.
That's helpful. And I just want to, just as a follow-up, the reason I ask is, like, sometimes, we may hear out in the community, obviously anecdotally, but I was recently talking with one of our few remaining single unit home builders who it was expressing concerns about the Crow Road area, and that even with services that could be expanded into that area, there was some concern about the topography and specifically the clay in the ground. So anyway, I wouldn't know how you all would gather that information if not talking to very specific types of individuals that would be doing that work. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of
Yeah.
flag that because I think it's important feedback, but I don't know what process we use to gather that feedback. So anyway.
Yeah, and we have working groups, we've been doing interviews, and we'll continue to do that. So yeah, that's good to hear. I'm not sure what we can do about clay soil. But there's other things that are probably more in our control than that one. But that is a bit disheartening because that is one of our larger residentially planned undeveloped areas, and is going forward right now. It's in the planning stages for construction to be served. So
Bill, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I appreciate this, and I studied this earlier this week, and I like that kind of the methodology that you're using for this, and it's great for long-term planning and doing this long-term 20-year supply and precedent that you need for the UGB expansion analysis, so on. That said, I mean, as we talked about it earlier. I mean, even though we're kind of on par with certain metrics to meet the forecast needs that have been identified, we just still know that we are way behind in housing, and so housing production. And so really, adopting things 18 months from now still seems like kind of cold comfort for people who are really trying to get, housing production done. And I'm glad to hear that there are things that you're doing and you're working on about efficiency measures, but there may be other things that could still be done, administratively by the city or other kind of, things that may be hard to discern how effective they are. But I know that some other cities have been piloting things to try a full court press to promote housing production. Is there an ability within, like, say, this first yellow bar under housing and jobs actions, that actions part one, to perhaps have the council do something that adopts some things that even before the end of this year? So not waiting 18 months from now, but within the next 6 months, there's half a dozen things that could be done as near-term efforts to at least see if they work.
You're muted.
Heather, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. And a little mute things that.
She's not muted, but we can't hear her because you can see but
you still can't hear me?
there.
Now we got you.
Oh, weird. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I didn't do anything, but I just came back on. What I was gonna say was that you're absolutely right. Not every action that we could take needs to be adopted. And there probably are some actions that could be implemented, I guess is the word I would use, before 2026. So we're in the gathering stages. I will also say it's the same people, and it's the same staff. Like, we are under capacity. And it's gonna get worse. We have we have vacancies that haven't been filled. We have new vacancies. I think I told everyone that Zoli is no longer with the city of Eugene. We miss her dearly. She left in November. We've got one other planner that's leaving. We have a planner that's retiring. We've got folks that have other leaves going on. So I hear what you're saying, and I don't know how, if we stop and pivot, it will literally be stopping and pivoting. We will not be able to, you know what I mean? And so,
Believe me, I'm not asking you, or never would I suggest that you stop doing what you're doing.
yeah,
I'm more or less suggesting, and it may not even be planning staff,
yeah,
administrative staff within the building permit division or elsewhere that might be able to do something that is an improvement or an innovation that doesn't
yes,
maybe even require going to the council, or maybe
yes,
goes to the council and somebody writes an AIS, but something that kind of moves the ball and advances this further, where you break up some
yes,
adoption actions that could occur sooner. And I'm
yes.
sensitive to the fact of your staffing issues.
Sorry, I get excited. Um, yeah, no, yes, and we have identified those, and and we probably haven't identified all of them. So, I mean, we've sat down with you and asked questions. If anyone has, feel free to email me. We're always taking suggestions. That's part of the reason we looked at the adjustment reviews, because that seemed like that would be a code amendment. But it's information about where we've got problems in our code. But yeah, definitely we've identified those, and hopefully we can do some of those sooner rather than later. I mean, we don't not want to do those things. It's not like we're trying to put blinders on or anything. But we have identified at least a couple of things that seem promising, that are maybe like interpretations or process improvement kind of stuff that you're right wouldn't require. Yes. So sorry, I jumped on you about that.
Okay, I've got a question or two. First off, how does the comp plan play into this and adopting the comp plan? Does that have implications on our BLI or the urban growth boundary or the housing plannings, or is that just a part of your department's work plan?
Well, adopting the land use designation map, the parcel
Mhm.
specific land use designation map, we want to use that. We will use the draft version because it won't be adopted by the time we run the BLI in early 2026, but we will use that as the basis for our BLI that's going to be adopted. So that is impactful and very exciting. Um, the policies, it depends. I mean, there
Well, let
are,
me let me just drill down a little bit.
okay.
How much of the comp plan is planning on getting adopted? Are we just doing one or two more chapters, or is it going to be the complete 9 chapters that's trying to get adopted?
Yeah. I don't remember the number, and Rebecca would probably be mad at me that I don't remember the number, but it's like, so we have the land use chapter already, and we're gonna add to that with the land use map. There's a housing chapter, new housing, 5.
I think
Elena
so.
says 5.
I think 5 chapters.
Yeah,
What
so it
is the
won't be all of the new chapters, but most of the remaining chapters that we need to do.
what about the public facilities? The
We
perf that's going to be in it because that would
it, it
land.
is it is
Okay.
but that specific chapter, the public facilities and services chapter, and the public facilities plan that accompanies that chapter we're planning to adopt in 2027.
Okay,
So
thanks. And that's fine. That's just I just kind of wanted an update on that because that was in the books back when I was on planning commission, and that was many, many years ago. The second question I have is about the ONA rules and how if you've seen what's coming down the pipe, and when we do get to the blue bar of the UGB expansion analysis, are the rules in there that are going to let us look at serviceability, slope, and those types of things? Have we seen those rules yet and know that that's going to help us be able to pick which lands we want to use? Because in the past we weren't able to use those things. And that's why we have so much hilly land in our buildable lands inventory.
It's a 2-year working group and rulemaking process. So I would say the first year, last year, were related to expansion and the buildable lands inventory. Those rules will be coming out. They will be effective in January of 2026. So they're in kind of the concept phase. But I mean, it's been like, what do you think about this? The city does this, what we've heard issues about this. And the state has definitely heard issues about what we had called here phantom capacity. And so there's been discussions about might you take a certain percentage off of your capacity to assume that, it's not all going to develop in 20 years and to kind of account for things like that. Might you look at, there is going to be new development readiness analysis that we have to do to show whether or not you have at least 8 years of your housing land supply is development ready. But what exactly that means is part of the rulemaking that's going on, but there's a big interest in looking at infrastructure issues and kind of raising that to the forefront.
Okay, thanks. That's all I needed.
Yep.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, I mean, I'm a little sad as well when I look at and see the 2030s. That is disheartening. I understand it. I think that there's going to be a lot of people in our community that don't understand that, and being able to communicate with them the shackles that we are in through our land use laws and planning is a difficult thing to answer. I've had to answer it for the last 10 years. It's like, why don't we just expand the urban growth boundary? It's like, it's not that easy. There's hoops you have to jump through. So I think the communication part of this is going to be as important as the work. And I know that you guys don't have a comm team in PDD, but it is part of the game. So just wanted to lay that out. We are at about 20 after 7. So would you be okay with us pushing off the other section till our next meeting? And it did look to me like you had the March 6th one crossed off, correct? Okay. So we're looking at meeting on March 20th, tentatively.
Yes, I think we will, because we at least need to go through population and employment. And I think, Elena, we're hoping we'll have employment building
development.
permits.
Yeah, should.
Okay.
Yep.
And at what point do you present the annual report to the council?
We don't present the annual report to council. We took the comprehensive report to them when we did that the first year. And then, as Heather mentioned earlier, the annual reports are really meant to be more of a report card type thing. So we send it to them, but we don't go to planning commission or council with the annual reports. But we will, I mean, our sort of like hard drop dead deadline is July 1st. We try to have it to them before then, ideally in May or June, but yeah, that's the timeline.
All right. Anybody else want to say something? Oh, go ahead, Heather.
Sorry. I just, for those that are not able to be at the meeting today, just a reminder to review the materials and give us comments. We're always taking comments, as you know. And I also wanted to flag for the group something I forgot to mention. Our color scheme and the charts, we have been trying to revamp that based on feedback that we've gotten from you all over the years. And so we are updating the grays and the blues specifically and a little bit on the oranges to try to tweak things a little bit so there's more distinction between the shades within there. So keep an eye out for that. And can we talk about, do we have just a couple minutes to talk about recruitment? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yes.
We did receive a good number of applicants this year. When this group was originally put together in 2018, there was sort of a matrix of backgrounds and qualities people have. And so I haven't quite had time to sit with all the applications and fill that out. But we're hopeful that we will definitely have some new folks in July based on the pool and the interest that we're seeing. So,
How many seats are we
well,
trying to fill?
I think that's sort of a TBD. So the bylaws say that the minimum is 10 and the maximum is 15. And so we have 10 currently. However, 2 individuals did not reapply and on our current makeup. So Howard and Lisa won't be serving after this term ends. And that would put us at 8. And so we at least wanted to, I think, we need to fill 2 seats, but potentially up to,
Maybe 12 or 13.
yeah. Depends on if people have the right fit and qualifications and makeup with everybody else.
So can I just put out there, when you're thinking about that, when we went through the bylaws on this early on, one of the concerns was institutional knowledge from the positions that are mandated, Planning Commission, Sustainability Commission, those people. So at some point, Tiffany is going to be off of Planning Commission, but we don't, if she's willing, we don't want to lose that voice. That's kind of what happened with me. My initial position was through Planning Commission. I went off. So keep that in mind when you leave. That's why we kind of wanted to leave a few spaces open so that if somebody terms off of one of the mandated commissions, that there's still an opportunity for them to stay on, and because it's really, the institutional knowledge is as important to this committee as new members are, in my view. So just keep that in mind when we're filling the number. All right.
Yeah,
Anything?
that's been huge. I just want to echo your sentiment, John. That's been really great to have those threads.
Yeah. And we've lost some over the years, and we're losing some with Howard. If Howard's not coming back, we're losing some with him. You know, we lost Ed McMahon, which was a big loss, and so, you know, I like to cycle it through, but the learning curve is very important to keep going. So Tiffany.
Hey, thanks, John. I just was curious about the timeline because I know that the appointments would need to happen for, like, assuming a July 1st for any new people. I think I'm assuming that, but I just don't know. I mean, obviously, I was actually a little surprised when I saw the city's announcement for recruitment in January, and it was only for a 30-day window. And I thought, what are they doing between February and June? And so I am actually curious about what's happening between now and then, and what does that process look like, if you could share, and then just kind of, when we would, because I know that the ETAC is not appointed by council, and so the city manager, but I am just kind of curious about the timeline.
Yeah, ETAC's not appointed by council, but we sort of jump onto that recruitment process because there is you know, the city manager's office pushes out boards and committees, commissions, and does outreach and marketing around that. And so we sort of jump onto that process, even though ETAC recruitment's not part of council appointment. But I think I think the background for city manager's office with the council appointment and all their different committees, they're also doing the numbering and ranking and getting that information to council, who then decide on interviews and all of that. So that's sort of what's happening in the background there. I think for us, we will be doing that background ourselves and the interviewing ourselves, and then making a recommendation to Sarah on appointments. And so we received those on January 31st, and I have been very, very busy and have not done the next steps on that. So, which is kind of nice that I do have an extended timeline, but I mean, I don't think we're trying to wait months and months and have it hanging out there at all. But hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have done that review and at least hopefully scheduled some interviews.
And then she could appoint it before June, the end of June, correct?
I
'Cause I mean, there's
mean,
going to be some serious work that's going to be happening in March, April, May.
yeah, I don't know. I guess Heather and I need to talk about that. That wasn't
Yeah, I mean,
our
people's
intention.
terms are up at the end of June.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right.
Right?
Yeah, all right.
But one of the things we have kind of emphasized at this group for new people coming on is the ability for them to listen to meetings without actually being a member, and just kind of getting familiar with the format and getting up to speed. So it does provide that opportunity for that, which would be great.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else with anything for the good of the order? 3 minutes early. Try and beat that, Tiffany. All right, with that, we are adjourned.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, staff.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone.